Hi, this video was gonna have half of my gameplay in it, but it looks like I deleted it, so I can't use it, so that's why it's not in here. Screw me, screw my life. Enjoy the video. So Battlefield Hardline is undoubtedly the black sheep of the Battlefield family. Shunned, castigated, and fed only cold cabbage for dinner, you know, that kind of stuff. It's not exactly a shining light of EA's output history, and was in fact the final game that Visceral Games worked on. Actually, they did go on to work on an untitled Star Wars game codenamed Project Ragtag, but that didn't exactly go to plan. But did it deserve to be looked down upon as it has been, and why exactly was it so hated in the first place?
You done f***ed it up!
Because I mean, many of you know that Hardline isn't held in high regard by the community at large that was there to experience it, but there's a lot of bandwagoning that happens in the gaming industry and in general, and still many don't actually know why this is the case. In fact, I didn't. So I've done my research over recent weeks, trawling over the internet from years gone by, and now lay out the 4 main reasons I can find that people say Hardline failed and why it's hated by so many. If this video does alright, then I'll do another video about whether it's now worth your time and include more of my own personal feelings about it now that I've played it, and of course let me know what you thought of Hardline when it came out, and if that's changed now or not. This is why Battlefield Hardline was so hated. This video is brought to you by the Board of Awesome from the epic people that support the channel on Patreon, and the current goal for the channel is to hit 60k subscribers, currently sitting at 55.5k. So if you're new here or want to see more, hitting that subscribe button would be fantastic. Thank you so much. Willfully forgotten. That's how I'd describe Battlefield Hardline. Before looking up why the game was hated and failed and whatever else, I tried testing what kind of imprint it's had upon the community when compared with other titles. I went to the Battlefield subreddit and selected the top posts of all time, and I tried searching for both the terms Hardline and BFH, and I simply couldn't find a single post that included them. I scrolled and nope, loads of BF4, BF1, BF5, etc. So after a while I just gave up. It's as if Hardline never even happened for many players. And so the first reason for this that I found mentioned a lot is the one that's also most often brought up, and that is that it's not a Battlefield game. At least that's the common complaint, which is a confusing statement for some to hear, as well this is of course a Battlefield game, but Battlefield Hardline was a pretty vast departure from the core vision and execution of this series. Hardline was based around cops and robbers basically, a homage to over-the-top action movies, often featuring such a setup. But more specifically, Hardline is about a drug war in Miami, the police attempting to stop the established cartels. In short, it's a war on crime, not an actual war as such, which to the well-initiated will sound like it doesn't really fit the traditional Battlefield concept of actual military warfare. A pretty consistent theme throughout the series. And although it isn't the most realistic series at all, it had, and indeed has, always had at least some form of grounding in realism, however thin it may be. Hardline overall just didn't really buy into these concepts, and so a lot of the things that players instantly associated with Battlefield, they didn't get from Hardline, which is a tough break for players when you have Battlefield in the title.
And I don't say this happily, I'm really sad that this game hasn't done as well as I was hoping it would, because I actually enjoy the game for what it is, but it just was not adopted strongly enough by the PC community, and now the player base is pretty much dead. At any given moment I can find 2 servers on Battlefield Hardline.
This was more of a spin-off than another iteration for the franchise. Many have stated that the game may have fared better, or at least could have been held in higher regard, if it was more clearly advertised as a spin-off, less so pushing the Battlefield association. Alas, that's not what happened. Sometimes studios take a risk. At times that pays off big time and it looks like a masterstroke, other times it causes a huge flop. Hardline was unfortunately closer to the latter than the former. Although it did have encouraging sales to begin with, and indeed quite positive critical reviews, this didn't last. Sales didn't reach the heights of other Battlefield games overall, and actual player reviews, public reviews if you like, were far more damning. This wasn't what many expected from a Battlefield game, and indeed wasn't what many wanted due to those expectations. But that's the commonly trodden path of explanation. There's more to it that normally doesn't really get featured. Let's jump into a much much less considered point: the timing of the announcement of Battlefield Hardline. From what I can gather, details emerged about Hardline's existence not long after BF4 had finally arguably reached a playable state, or at least an enjoyable playable state for most players, because much like BF5, BF4 released as a total horror show, with a lot of talk about it actually being a worse launch than BF5. The truth is that DICE has somewhat of a history of error-strewn Battlefield games. They just manage to turn stuff around usually, either by luck or by judgment. After all, it is a very complex game. That's not an excuse at all, but it is at least a reason. In Battlefield 5 though, we saw a title they couldn't or wouldn't set right, and it was cancelled early. And I'm not just going off on a tangent here, this is actually of relevance, because this was the first obvious true overall failing for DICE, as Hardline was handled by Visceral Games, as again I mentioned earlier, thus allowing for the altered release schedule because they could work on this while DICE were working on whatever else. But this doesn't matter to the public. It doesn't matter to them who made it and what kind of development cycle this allows for, and actually many simply wouldn't have realized this was the case in the first place. Either way, with BF4 being such a mess for so long, releasing October 2013, remaining in that state for months, and then in just March 2014, details start coming out about another Battlefield game being worked on and set to release in the not too distant future. This turns some fans against the series, against its practices. Some can forgive this kind of stuff, but some can't. Sometimes this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, especially with Battlefield generally having a longer lifespan for each title and thus development cycle than something like Call of Duty. I mean, imagine it happening in more modern times. So say a few months after BF5's debacle of a launch, we had received news of another Battlefield title being in development while we still waited for the game to actually, well, basically get good. It doesn't paint a pretty picture. Now, let's move on and speed this up a bit, otherwise I'll be talking forever. So another complaint I found a lot on posts from around 5 years ago is weapon balancing, something I discussed a whole lot in Battlefield 5. In Hardline, it was seemingly, arguably, just off, at least for some of those with detailed knowledge of shooters or statistical analysis capabilities. I must add though that this is always a divisive topic. Some will no doubt have enjoyed the weapon balancing of Hardline, some may disagree it was bad. I wasn't there to experience it, so I'm simply laying this out as a commonly used reason for disliking Hardline, rather than saying it has any real merit. So I'm not going to go into the details about it really, because of course things have changed since then with patches, but I've seen a lot of talk about certain attachments being so good they basically became crutch choices, and that assault rifles were at one point too good, or at least just favouring the faster firing ones if you could learn the recoil pattern, which some say wasn't very hard, especially with a mouse. The K10 SMG at one point was just a monster, and I could go on, but it's all irrelevant now, you get the idea. A more holistic balancing approach appears to have been desired by the community, rather than having a lot of weapons potentially being designed without much consideration of how other weapons fared against them, or alternatively, just being balanced poorly. And so finally we come to that some complained about the time to kill, and I don't want to put too much weight of value on this point, because the time to kill is complained about every single time a Battlefield game releases, and indeed a lot of FPS games release, just to different degrees and by different people. But some were turned off by it, saying you died too quickly, that there wasn't enough time to react, it was too much like COD, and all kinds of statements that usually come up with this kind of complaint. I don't want to get involved in this, but feel free to let me know what you thought of Hardline's time to kill in the comments below. And so of course there were other issues and complaints, some valid and some less so, but these were the apparent key four, and I hope that it fleshes out for some of you why Hardline was received as it was and why it's still viewed like that by some in the community. For others of you, maybe this is just a bit of nostalgia, so I hope you enjoyed that, and let me know what other issues you had with Hardline, or if you actually really enjoyed it. If there is enough interest, then I'll make that follow-up video for Hardline now, more of its positives and my own feelings and whether it's worth your time, and thank you so much once again for watching. If you enjoyed, hitting the like button and the subscribe button would be hugely appreciated if you're new or want to see more. All the links to my Twitch and social media, including Twitter, Discord, all of that can be found in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I'm GetGoodGuy, and I will see you next time. Laters. I think they just jumped out over here. Behind me? Yeah. Oh, there were 3? 2? 3? I don't know how many there were. How many kills did I get? I'm not sure. Okay, we haven't used Scout yet. And for this, it seemed like Martini Henry with a bayonet. Bruh, just spawned. Okay, thanks. That's awesome.